Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Shawn Marshall with Lean Energy, and I am here today with a group of rock stars, and I do not say that lightly. These guys have all done just superb work. Kirby for, well over 10 years in the CCA space. Geof coming on in 2012, actually, 11 or 12, and then Jan most recently as the CEO of Peninsula Clean Energy. So our session today is entitled Operational Efficiency, Balancing Priorities, and Staying Out of Trouble, which probably means I should not be your moderator, but you know. And what we're going to do today is go ahead and think about these things in a kind of chronological fashion. We're going to have Kirby kick off with talking about operational efficiencies, things to consider, risk mitigations during implementation phase and pre-launch. We'll then move to Jan Pepper, who is going to talk about some of these same things when you are at launch and enrolling customers, very early operations, because what matters and what's efficient and what can get you in trouble changes as you move along the life cycle of the agency, of the organization. And so then we will wrap up with Geof Syphers, who is the CEO of Sonoma Clean Power, to talk about what are some of those issues once you've launched and once the program is operational and into like the first 1 to 5 years. So that's how we're going to structure it. Each presenter has been asked to provide 10 minutes of comments or slides, and then we'll just have kind of a town hall discussion and plenty of time for Q&A. So I'm going to be very brief in my introductions here. Kirby Dusel should have been up on the stage at lunchtime. He has been in the CCA space since before I came around, 2002? Something like that?
A little bit after that, not much.
Not much after that. And I met Kirby long ago when he was with Navigant Consulting and helping put Marin Clean Energy together. And in his previous life, he served at the State Department of Water Resources during the energy crisis, dealing with power procurement issues and all of that. And in the last several years, he is the founder and vice president of Pacific Energy Advisors. PEA has been a technical energy advisor on multiple CCA programs, at least 6, if not more, and several more that are emergent. Jan Pepper is the CEO of Peninsula Clean Energy, which is a program that launched last October, and they just finished enrolling all of their customers. So shout out to PCE. You guys are fully operational now. Jan has over 30 years of energy and utility experience with a focus on renewables, contracting, and financing. Prior to her role as a CEO, she was with Silicon Valley Power, which serves the power needs for the city of Santa Clara, and founded 4 energy startups, notably APX and Clean Power Markets, where she pioneered the use of renewable energy certificates as the standard currency for renewables trading, and also implemented New Jersey's Solar Rex program, which was very successful there. Jan, in all of her spare time, is also an elected official, serving on the city council for the city of Los Altos since 2012, and currently serving on that council. Many of you in the room also know Geof Syphers, who was very insightful this morning. Thank you for your comments. Geof is the CEO of Sonoma Clean Power, which launched in 2013. Sonoma is now serving 600,000 people in both Sonoma and Mendocino counties. So they recently brought on the County of Mendocino in their cities. Geof is an energy engineer and energy consultant who administered customer programs and training in energy efficiency for the IOUs, and also, way back when, started DNV's Green Building Group back in '98. He managed entitlements, design, permitting, construction of over $1 billion of public facilities and low-income housing in the state of California. So he really does bring some of actually what you were talking about this morning with Commissioner Picker. So welcome to our speakers, and we're going to kick off with Kirby to talk to us about staying out of trouble and what the opportunities are pre-launch. Kirby?
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you're not in a food-induced post-lunch coma here. Anyway, it's really neat being in a room. It's really neat being in a room like this. And, you know, it wasn't too long ago when myself and my business partner, John DeLessie, who couldn't be here, we were just kicking the idea around that wouldn't it be neat to have 1 million CCA customers by 2020? I think we beat that just a little bit, which is really neat, and it's a credit to all the good work that's gone on out there. But more appropriate, I guess, to the subject matter here today, I just wanted to touch on briefly. I think I have 10 things written down here that struck me as particularly important during pre-launch activities for CCAs, and really, I think each one of these things, while it might not be an item that specifically is focused on staying out of trouble, I think these are things that will ultimately help keep you out of trouble. And in particular, I wanted to touch on first, because I think it's super important, is positioning, the importance of positioning executive leadership early on in the process. I think we've observed along the way that team strength and successful business relationships are improved. The success of those items is significantly improved when you position executive leaders early, give them the opportunity to participate in key decision making, and in particular, procurement-related decisions, key hires, key vendor selection, et cetera. I think I really want to make sure I leave that one behind with you. Another one is just being really clear on what your goals and objectives are, and being able to concisely answer questions like, why are we doing this, and what do we offer? I think, far too often, it's really a matter of trying to do too many things at once and being too many things to too many people at the same time. And taking that longer term view and answering those questions. Not just what do we want to do today, because that's very important to know what it looks like when you launch, but to also know that you don't need to do all the things that you want to do ultimately on day one. You can take time to plan for those, staff those items and projects, programs, and of course fund them, which is very important as well. I think another item that's super important would be identifying your funding for startup activities and pre-implementation activities, and in particular trying to self-fund those if you can, because anything worth doing should be worth investing in. And I think doing CCA implementation on a shoestring budget is a little bit dangerous. So find your funding sources early, get strong commitments from those sources, and make sure you have those funds available to make sure that the road ahead is a smooth one and well covered. Another item, and I think this really gets to the kind of compliance angle a bit, is the timing of your launch. It's really important to realize that there are some key differences in seasonal rate structures out there. And in particular, the summer rates tend to offer improved margins early on in the life cycle of a CCA. And I think you've seen a number of CCAs recently take advantage of that during their implementation activities, trying to roll in customers in the late spring so that they can leverage those summer rates and the margins that those create early on in program finances. And I think also one of the things to keep in mind related to the timing of launch is where your launch is falling in relation to compliance periods, and in particular, renewable portfolio standard compliance periods. What we've seen in each of the first two compliance periods under the pre-2020 RPS compliance regime is a bit of an uptick in renewable energy pricing towards the end of those compliance periods, and to the extent that you can avoid that and launch near the beginning of one of those compliance periods, I think it's a very easy way to help hold costs down. And then, of course, related to that item would be for a program, a CCA program that isn't, say, is interested in pushing the envelope with renewable energy procurement and taking more of a compliance-based approach, you can avoid the pitfalls of running into the inability to make adjustments and meet those compliance mandates if you're trying to do it right at the end of a compliance period. Yeah, so presently we're in the third compliance period, which is basically running from the beginning of this year until December 31st of 2020. And then I think moving into the post-2020 compliance regime, we have a 4-year period to kick things off, followed by 2 3-year periods leading up until December 31 of 2030. So, those are big windows, so you do have some flexibility, but we did notice, recently, when there were some launch activities that were undertaken and expansion activities that were undertaken late in those compliance periods, it does put a bit of upward pressure on pricing, and also can affect the availability of products to the extent that there's competition for them out there. And that certainly seems to be the case with all of the renewable energy procurement going on, particularly with a lot of the Northern California CCAs that have just pushed the envelope on renewable procurement. And the other thing I think is really important is just sequencing your activities appropriately, if you will. And one thing that came to mind as I was flying in yesterday was that I've never noticed that airlines serve drinks or do their safety spiels while the plane's taking off, right? Because those are distractions. And I think you can kind of take that and put it within the context of CCAs, and that's really similar to trying to say, launch all of the programs that you want to have at the end of the day, and launch all of the, the complementary pricing options and whatnot, and trying to get that off the ground at the same time that you're trying to do basic fundamental activities to get the CCA up and going. Financial planning is obviously a huge one. Set a reserve policy, stick to it, make sure that you're saving money for a rainy day, and in particular, if rates happen to change along the way. So, creating the ability to stabilize rates through reserves, and also promote some ability, I guess, if you will, on the procurement side of the equation to collateralize different transactions. That strikes me as really important. In terms of procurement, one thing to keep in mind, I think once upon a time there was a very high level of concern about what opt-outs would look like, and would opt-outs be higher than expected. And I think what we've seen recently is that opt-outs are trending much lower than anticipated, which oddly has a risk associated with it, because if you've made a commitment as a CCA program to a certain level of renewable energy, carbon-free energy, whatever the case may be, and all of a sudden you find yourself with retail sales that are much higher than expected, you'll also find yourself in a position that might be scrambling to go out and buy more renewables. And when you do that, depending on the timing, you can of course expose yourself to increased costs. And that's something you'd certainly want to avoid. And then just regulatory compliance generally, I think it's very important to understand your obligations. Nobody really gives you a playbook when you get into this industry. And so for newer programs, it's really important to coordinate with the programs around you, to talk to experienced people, and get a good handle on what it is that you need to do. There are literally countless compliance obligations that you have as a CCA. It's a highly regulated industry, the utility industry. And so knowing the jurisdictional regulatory agencies that are going to be overseeing you, the various forms and templates and due dates, all of that is super important and will ultimately keep you out of trouble. Once upon a time, played for a baseball coach that used the expression, don't make the same mistake once, because he felt like by observing what others do and seeing the mistakes that they make, you don't need to make the same mistake yourself. And so it's really, I think, we've got great examples sitting here at the table with me. Pay attention to what they've done.
Of mistakes.
No.
Don't make our mistakes.
That's right. So that wasn't the mistake example so much as the learn from the things that have been done right. There's been many more things done right than wrong along the way, and I think you've got a great opportunity now with all of the CCA programs that have been launched recently to look around you, to coordinate with those other programs, to coordinate with the associations that are being formed of those programs, and learn from them. And I think I'll stop there because I've probably gone over my time.
So, so the question is, how do you balance priorities during the launch and stay out of trouble, be operationally efficient, and all of that? So basically, there's a lot of balls up in the air at one time, and how do you balance all these priorities? Because they're actually all super important. But I'll talk a little bit about how we went about trying to make some of them more important than others. First of all, I mean, our overall goal was to minimize our opt-outs, because that was one of the key metrics that our board was interested in. We wanted to make sure that we were bringing value to as many people in San Mateo County as we could through Peninsula Clean Energy. So that was one thing that we were watching really closely. And then So we tried to hone our message. What is the key message that we wanted to say to our customers? And for us, it was cleaner and greener at lower rates. So to try to come up with something that was really easy to remember and that we could all get behind and that we all agreed on. And then there were certain things that we just had to do. There's certain laws there's the law that was put out there that said we have to send a certain number of enrollment notices before our customers get enrolled and a certain number afterwards. And we spent a lot of time looking at what turns out to be kind of inconsistent regulations as far as what that timing really is, and talking to our lawyers and making sure that we met the law in whatever way it might be interpreted. And then there's public outreach or customer outreach. How do you reach all of those customers? Oops. And, our first phase was in October of 2016, where we reached out to our 20% of our residential customers, all of our small and medium commercial customers, and all of our municipal accounts. And then last summer, actually, we decided to combine our phases 2 and 3. We were going to have a second phase in April and then our third phase this coming October. And we decided that we would just combine those and have that second phase be everyone else, the other 80% of our residential and all of our large commercial. So we just are in the process of finishing up sending notices to 210,000 new customers that we enrolled in April. So that took a lot of effort, and we had a great team. And then there's also the financial needs, as Kirby mentioned. So we did get a line of credit from Barclays Bank to borrow $12 million for them based on our projections of how much money we would need. And then kind of based on what Kirby said, our opt-outs were way less than we projected. We projected 15% opt-outs. Our opt-outs currently are at 1.3%. So we have a lot more revenue coming in than we had expected. True, we did have to buy more power, but fortunately, buying power just on the open market recently has been great because power prices have been super low. So we actually are in the black much faster than we expected to be. We did not have to borrow all the money that we expected to from Barclays, and in fact, we're hoping to pay it all back at the end of this year. Then there's procurement. So that's clearly important. If we're going to serve customers, we definitely have to have the procurement finished before we start serving those customers. And then there's staffing. So we went very slowly in our staffing. I think in a previous panel where the chair of our board, Dave Pine, spoke, he mentioned our desk situation when we first started out. And basically, there were 4 of us sitting at a desk this large. And in some respects, we couldn't staff up much more because we didn't have room to put people. We're now in a new temporary location, so we can hire a few more people, and then we'll be in our final location in a few months. But that kind of speaks to startup needs. There's just some really mundane things that you do as a startup. Getting office space, getting your phones to work and the internet bandwidth that you need, setting up a bank account, trying to get a credit card. We actually haven't done that yet because the banks are still insisting that we personally guarantee the credit card. So we're looking for another bank that maybe won't require that. And then, just other IT needs, getting computers, getting those on time, getting them encrypted so that if we lose them, important information doesn't get out there. So those are some mundane things that just have to be done. And then there's local programs. Everyone wants to do the local programs, right? We just started. So when are you going to start doing a FIT program? When are you going to start doing an energy efficiency program? And that's one area where we've said, you know what? We're just starting up. The first thing we need to do is make sure that we are delivering energy to all of our customers, that we're getting the noticing out to all those customers, and just really keeping our eye on the ball initially as to what is the first thing that we need to do to be successful. Having the largest customer base that we can is one way for us to be successful, and that has been our focus right here at launch. And then what else is there? Oh, the regulatory compliance. So we hire consultants like PEA to file all those reports that we need to file here and there, and they keep us on the straight and narrow. And then, you know, one other ball that I should have put in the air here as a priority is governance and working with our board. In San Mateo County, PCE has a 22-member board, which consists of a council member from each of the 20 cities in our county, plus 2 of the county supervisors. And some people, when they say that, they say, oh my God, how do you manage that? They're actually a fantastic board, and a number of them have gotten super engaged with what we've been doing, and we've gotten them involved in our energy procurement. We did an RFP in November to start lining up some long-term power purchase agreements, and we had a number of our board members meeting the different power providers so that they could feel comfortable with who they were, and then when we came to the 22-member board to ask for their agreement and approval of signing, you know, many hundreds of millions of dollars worth of energy procurement over 20 years, that they would feel comfortable and vote in favor of that. And then there's also working with the stakeholders and continuing to work with them to make sure that we're reaching out to labor, to the environmental groups, to all of the different constituencies in the county who have been so helpful in making our launch successful and continuing to keep them involved. So one of the things we're focusing on right now is a Citizens Advisory Committee. When PCE first started, before we existed, every city was invited to the table at the very beginning, as well as people from all of the stakeholder groups. Once the JPA was formed and the board was formed, the stakeholders that were not the elected officials from those cities were no longer kind of at the table. So we had a Citizens Advisory Committee that continued to have input and be involved in what we were doing. The way the agreement was set forth, that was due to expire at the end of last year. So we are now in the process of ramping that up again to make sure that we have a lot of citizen involvement representing the full breadth and geographic expanse of San Mateo County, and have them continue to be actively involved. So, you know, it's hard to say what's the priority. They're all priorities, but probably the top are getting the notices out, getting the procurement done, and getting the message out to our customers so that they stay our customers.
Geof will be in the mindset of now we have an operational program, and what are the opportunities and efficiencies in staying out of trouble when you're launched?
Yeah, I think the theme for this period is probably moving from dealing with existential problems to trying to optimize things. And so there is so much, right? One of the things to acknowledge is that public agencies don't normally form from scratch. And here we are in California, and we've just formed a whole bunch of them from scratch. So I think recognizing that that is a boatload of work separate from the operation of a community choice program, and recognizing that, you know, you're going to need everything from a benefits system to, you know, all of those kinds of tools. It is good for context. And then I think the kind of shifting from the existential threats and worries of did our notices go out properly and all the rest to optimizing still deals with big threats. Some of the issues that we've been dealing with are really getting into the finer points of compliance. So in my first year of operations at Sonoma Clean Power, we were really focused on the filings we had to do to remain compliant with a number of agencies. And I think there are about, 60, 65 filings or so a year? It's in that neighborhood, so this is a major task. What we did after the first year is realize the regulators don't know their regulations very well. And when they give you advice, it's sometimes wrong. And if you follow their advice, you're liable. So this raises the bar. Because you have to know sometimes, and there are several examples whose names will be unmentioned, who basically the regulators gave us bad advice, and we made a filing, and it was incorrect, and fortunately we, explained the situation and we were given a second chance. But technically you're liable for situations where you get bad advice. So that escalated the importance in our thinking about making sure we had kick-ass staff and consultants working for us who understood these and then checked repeatedly every year to see what had changed in advance of these filings. And so we have 3 outside legal firms we've engaged. Each of them have a specialty. We've got a regulatory specialty firm, we've got a contract specialty firm, and we've got a legislative specialty firm. That's, well, aside from HR and all the other specialty folks out there. So kind of acknowledging those issues and also thinking about how to address them. I think we can't underscore enough up here how important it is to under-promise on program activity in the first, let's say, 3 to 5 years. In fact, I would advise, and this sounds rough, don't spend a dime in your first 2 years at all on program activities, because credit is worth more than cash. If you can build credit, and if, by the way, if you're wondering about why we don't have credit, it's because CCAs generally are set up to have no recourse to their members. And I highly advise that system, because if you have recourse to your members, so we're in a small county, we've signed well over $1 billion of contracts. Not even our biggest member has any kind of bank like that. If we failed and the recourse actually went to our members, then they would be bankrupt and insolvent. The entire county of Sonoma County couldn't even pick up that kind of tab. So you need credit, and in order to have credit, you need reserves, you need great load forecasts, you need to show improvement on matching your financial projections from year to year. You need to show that your board is willing to raise rates. If your board is not willing to raise rates, you have a deficient board, and the creditors will say, you actually don't have the ability to recover your costs. You need to make sure that the reserves are somewhat proportional, or at least your target, to what your expenses are. And what I'd recommend, and this is not official advice, but we're aiming for an absolute minimum of 3 months of cash on hand. That's a big number for a CCA. And in fact, a lot of the credit rating agencies are asking for 6 months to get a single A investment grade rating. I think one other aspect of compliance risk is not only that you're responsible, but you can't outsource the responsibility. So even though there are firms who can do compliance filings for you, and even though there are legal firms that can review that and help you understand them, your agency is still liable for the accuracy and veracity of those filings. And so I think that aspect is key, and we've been working on that. And I think some of the messaging we've been working on since being operational is really recognizing and fine-tuning how we talk about community choice. So a lot of early programs talk about how the chief value is that we compete and we offer you an alternative to the utility. I don't think that's right. I actually think we don't compete with them, or at least they definitely don't compete with us, because a competitive market requires 2 parties to be competing with each other. They can't compete with us because they can't lose. So they're guaranteed to make the same amount of money whether we exist or not. And as a result, that's not really competition. I think the competition and in our nuanced messages, that all occurs inside the CCA. Because we go out, when we get a bid, we get 15, 20, 30 bidders, and we get a very robust market of bidders to supply us with energy. And that competition is happening under public stewardship, so there's a responsible adult in the room. And so we've started to change the message in the public. And what that did is it headed off some of the concerns that people have, which is they'll say things like, well, I don't know, when your prices go 1% over, PG&E or Edison or whoever, we're just going to leave. Well, okay, where's the value proposition in community choice? If we're so brittle that when our customers leave, when our rates go 1% or 2 or 5 over the utility, we haven't created a value proposition there. And so I think what I would argue is starting to think about what is your value? And I think it's being responsive to local needs. I mentioned that in the morning. And I think we need to show that. So I think we've been doing a lot of fine tuning on saying, let's get out in the community, We spend a huge amount of money and time and resources and staff being out in the community, working with schools, being at every event, and then investing. So we had 5 high schools build electric cars from kits, for example, and they drive around town with their names on it, and they love them. We made a documentary about it, and we showed it. Turns out that program, which cost us about $100,000, that program did more for creating customer loyalty than any message about renewable energy we've ever had. And it was the cheapest thing we've ever done. So it turns out people don't give a shit about electricity. They don't want to talk about electricity, they don't want to talk about electricity, and they don't want to talk about it. So don't talk about it. Talk about something else that you do with it. Talk about the good you're doing. Talk about the programs, talk about the technology, talk about the people whose jobs are affected. And it turns out, I think that fine-tuning is really important. Should I stop there? But let me say one more thing.
No, you got a couple minutes.
So board training. We have elected officials who serve on our board. I think a lot of you do. I think probably almost all of the CCEs do. And what that means is they can't be an expert in your business. We have a sheet with like 30 common acronyms we use in all the board packets, so people can use their Ovaltine decoder ring on what we're talking about. It's complicated. If we talk about KISO charge codes in board meetings, then everyone will just go, ah. So there's board training required. What is hedging? What is a portfolio? What does that mean? Why do we still have market risk when we've bought our entire portfolio? What is up with that? What is a REC? And why is everyone mad at them? And it turns out having a standard board training packet, turn it into a video if you want, add it to a 1-hour meeting with each of the board members one at a time, do a session when you've got a new board member or new turnover in the board. That kind of education goes a long way toward bringing them in, having them feel like they're smart enough to know the difference between a kilowatt hour and a kilowatt. What's the difference? Why are you talking about demand versus energy? So having those kind of conversations just to get the basics on the ground, tell them who's the Energy Commission, who's the Public Utilities Commission, what do they do? I think that's super valuable, and it helps with the conversation about harder topics when you've got that grounding of basic knowledge in a sense that they can keep up with the conversation. Let me leave it there.
Super, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to stand up here. I would now like to turn it over to the audience for questions. If we have questions from the audience, and I have a couple myself, yes. The question is, if you're not rolling out programs in the first 2 years as suggested, then what value proposition are you talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think what I would recommend with hindsight is spend a very small amount of money out of your marketing budget to run something that is relevant to your community. In ours, it was electric cars in high schools, let's say. In yours, it will be something different. But call it marketing and make that a high visibility kind of thing, and then start the planning process for future programs. Think about the use of CPUC funds. CPUC funds come with massive strings attached, which mostly say you can't do anything that's almost cost effective, which is where public agencies should be. You can only do things that are definitely cost effective, which is where the private sector is already working. So I would advise being cautious about going after CPUC money, but that's an option as well. But the reason I'm saying that is, I would advise trying to maximize your impact over, let's say, a 10-year horizon. And in order to do that, your first several years should be primarily built with solid operations, don't miss your load forecast, get your compliance filings in, build a whole bunch of cash, do the basics right, get your billing right. Turns out billing is really hard. Billing is so hard. We have 600,000 customers. We get over 100 calls a day about billing. And the average call time for those calls is about 20 minutes. Wow. So we've made videos, how to read your bill. We go out in our existing territory that we served for 3 years still, we go out and do public meetings about how to understand net metering bills. It's a major, major topic. So I think those kinds of activities can go a long way. But I think I just can't underline enough that if you spend your cash early on incentive type programs, so bigger budget programs, my hunch is you're not going to get nearly the kind of results you could when you actually have bonding capacity and when you have the ability to borrow. That debt capacity is really a powerful thing.
Okay. Any others want to comment on that? All right. Other questions? All right. Okay, great. Please. So the question is asking us to comment on various governance models, and in your particular case, the potential to potentially form a new JPA with elected governance or house it within a water JPA? Okay. And there are other governance models as well, so maybe you guys can opine on a couple of different things. Who would like to start with that? Jan?
Well, I'll start because Geof doesn't want to hog the mic, but and just give some general stuff, but I think Jeff's a good one to answer this since a water agency was behind the startup of Sonoma Clean Power. But I guess some of the things to consider are in a JPA setup, then the members are protected, the general funds of the members are protected. So if your JPA is composed of a number of cities or counties, then within the JPA, their general funds aren't at risk. And that's a huge thing for a city or a county to be, to look favorably at doing a JPA or to doing a CCA. There are examples, of course, of cities that have gone forward and done it anyways. For example, San Francisco, it's a enterprise fund. City of Lancaster has set up an interesting governance structure where even though they are a single city, they've formed a JPA to do the power procurement portion of it and the back office work. So in that way, my understanding is that they have protected the general fund of their city for some of the activities. So it really kind of depends on what your goals are, and how other things might be a city wants to make sure that they have local control, or they want to have control over the local programs, and that might again dictate what the governance structure is going to be so that they can implement those particular objectives.
Yeah, so just piggybacking, so our program actually has a water agency as one of our members, and it was the program that actually incubated the community choice program at the beginning. And the power of that, to have it as a member rather than as a sole entity that expands its jurisdiction, is what Jan was talking about. There's another power, so the shielding of risk. The other power is that when a water agency joins a JPA with cities and counties, for example, a JPA has the aggregated powers of each of its members individually. That's really powerful. So you may not need any of those powers anytime soon, but it's really useful to have the aggregated powers of each of its members because, for example, our water agency had the right to tax or condemn property. I don't plan on doing that. That would be pretty unpopular. But having the right to form a private corporation that's a subsidiary of a public agency, that was buried in a 1949 charter of the water agency. And I thought, tax credits, renewable energy, and then we figured out we couldn't do it. But having those options, the IRS did not like that idea. But having those kind of options built in as powers of your JPA might someday pay off for someone here, and we might actually figure out how to use those powers.
Others? Mitch?
Well, we just finished our launch on Sunday. Just enrolled our last of the 300,000 accounts that we have. So there is a lot of interest in getting programs going, and the next step that our staff is looking at is to kind of put into the hopper all of the different ideas that we have for local programs, and then try to figure out which of those make the most sense for our communities, and then try to figure out which ones we might bring forth to our board, or maybe bring forth to our executive committee to vet initially. But Geof makes a good point. Getting credit and getting a credit rating for our agency is really important, certainly as far as procurement goes. And we need to really understand what the rating agencies are going to require of us. And, you know, I don't like the idea of them kind of dictating what our business should be and kind of, you know, telling us what we should do when, because we really are community choice. We're really about meeting the needs of our community. So I think it's a discussion that we have yet had. But now that we are launched, that's a discussion that we can start having. So, well, our board, of course, is very excited about doing all the local programs because that's where they can. How do I temper that? I have to say no, but in a nice way so that they don't fire me. You know, I think, you know, we have a board that really understands the business needs, and the board members come from a lot of different backgrounds. There have been people who've started up Silicon Valley companies who've been very successful. We have others that come from communities that are, you know, have more low-income folks in it, and, you know, we really want to make sure that we're responding to them. We have stakeholders like the labor folks who we have a great relationship with, but who really want to make sure that we're hiring union labor for whatever it is that we might want to do. So it's really kind of balancing all of those interests and, you know, looking at the markets. You know, for some of us within Peninsula Clean Energy, you know, the overall goal is to reduce GHG emissions. So what can we do to do that? Should we do an EV program? How soon should we start? Should we just copy what Sonoma did, and probably a lot cheaper for us since they already laid the groundwork to do that? Should we do our own? Should we do energy storage? So we're just looking at all of those different things as far as how it best fits the 20 cities in the county of San Mateo. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's still kind of a work in progress.
Geof, do you have thoughts about how you manage those expectations, not only from your board, but stakeholders who always push to get to the next thing quickly?
I think it's good to be the bearer of good news on a regular basis, and at the same time that you're delivering that news, deliver the bad news. So my first action as CEO was to say we're cutting our RPS target, our renewable target, from 50% to 33% in the first year. And there was a good reason to do that. It made sure our rates were well under PG&E's. It gave us some place to go so we could actually increase it. Politically, that's really valuable. If you start at the end and you're not sure you can hold on to that, that's a brittle place to be. You're in a lot of jeopardy. So the board did not like that, but they went along with it because they saw the value of the prudence of it. But the truth was, it was like ripping a Band-Aid off. From that point on, we were done with that conversation, and it only got better from there. And I think when you do that again and again, and they see that you're not dribbling out bad news, it all comes at once, and then it's done, and you've solved the problem. I think that can build a lot of trust in the community, and being really ruthlessly honest. So I'm known in our community as the anti-solar guy, even though my major is in solar energy engineering. Because I've challenged the community to solve the problem, which is we actually have so much solar energy that adding more rooftop solar is now offsetting other solar. And so it's devaluing renewable energy. So what I've challenged them to do is say, add batteries, place it where there's a daytime load, put it in the right places, shift it to the evening. And I think that authenticity hasn't made me a friend of the community, but it's meant that they come back to me every once in a while and say, well, what else do you got? Like, what is the ISO doing? And I'm now a resource to them. And I think ultimately it's going to serve our solar community a lot more than just saying nice things, because that's dangerous. So I think it's being able to make tough calls and trying to educate the board to be there with you so they don't really completely do an end run. And it's not all easy. I mean, we're dealing with this is really hard. And anybody who thinks this is simple is just looking at the results. They're not looking at they haven't been in an office in the middle of a filing or a procurement deadline. So it's hard work, yeah, but it's worth it. Can I add one?
Yes,
quick,
of course.
Sorry, I've been talking a lot, but One quick thought is don't cheap out on staff. This is really, really hard work. And the problem is, if your board or the public are using comparables from city positions as pay scales, you're not going to get the people you need in the industry. This is much more expensive than city administrations or county administrations for similar positions. And it's worth spending the money to get the industry experts on your team. And so I am not the most highly paid person on my staff. My procurement services director is, because she handles about $160 million of expenses every year, and she's been doing a kick-ass job. So she gets paid more than I do. And I'm really happy with that. And that's the way it should be. And so I encourage you to think like that. And it requires more education, because what other public agency does marketing? You're going to be doing marketing in color, probably TV ads. And so that, you know, those kind of ideas are really odd to people who are used to a captured audience water agency or a sewer district or a road, you know, transportation authority. So set the expectation you're going to spend some serious money on staff. I mean, like 20 to 40% more than similar positions elsewhere.
Are either of your organizations PERS organizations, which is a somewhat related question?
Ours is not.
Okay.
Ours is not either.
And most CCAs are not, I think, at this point, unless you're embedded within a city, a non-PERS. So they've gone the defined contribution route, which allows you to spend a little bit more market rates on staff. Okay. One question here, and then I've got a couple for you guys. Yes, please, sir. Are there other metrics? And how are you determining what a community value or community need would be to shape your programs?
It's all channels. So we have public meetings we have a community advisory committee as well, and a board. People show up to every single one of those meetings. We get between 30 and 50 people to every meeting. Every time there's somebody standing up to make a pitch for something. We have walk-ins. We probably have about 10 walk-ins a day of people who have a question about their bill or want to pitch a program or a technology or resource. We go to events where people, you know, tell us about new things. But the biggest way is we're out in the community and we're at events. We go to the fair, the farmers market. We go to retirement homes, HOA meetings. We do about 150 presentations a year. And being out in the community is important, and that does not mean having a table at an event with no one there. It doesn't mean giving a group cash and sponsorship and not being there. It means being there and being able to answer all the questions with the people on hand. So when we send out a team to the county fair, we have a net metering expert, we have an intern who's learning, and we have probably one other person on deck to rotate out so they can go to the bathroom. And there is somebody at that booth who can answer every hard question we normally get from a customer, because if you say, I'll get back to you, you've lost them. They opt out. So basically our experience is have the answers, be present, and then lots and lots and lots of community contact. And I think people really appreciate that too, and that's what they thank us for.
I would ditto everything that Geof said, but in addition, I find it's really helpful to ask my board members, because they know their cities. They walked the streets to get elected to be the city council member representing that city. So they know what is important to their residents and their businesses, and they're a great resource for being able to identify what makes sense for their community.
Okay, we're going to have one last question. I'm going to put two on the table and let you guys pick which one you want to respond to, and we'll just go down the line if that's okay. So the two questions are very different. The first is, please comment on risk management policies and strategies as a key component of staying out of trouble. And the second option that you have is, what one thing do you wish had been done differently, or a mistake for future CCAs to avoid? I don't know who wants to kick off, but I'd love to hear from each of you on one of those.
Wow.
Want to start, Kirby?
I think you should start.
Yeah, sure. So I guess on the risk management piece of the puzzle, I think that's something that's it's obviously super important. It's super important to understand the implications of doing business in an industry that's very volatile, where prices can change suddenly and significantly, and what does that mean for your organization, and what risks are you willing to take on? And I think it's a very tough topic to translate for folks that aren't used to working in that space. You've got elected officials that probably aren't coming out of the electric utility industry and trying to understand things like I think Geof brought up earlier, where even though you might be contracted for a significant portion of your power supply, there are still risks that flow through to you as the buyer. And I think you can obviously draw upon what's been done before. Some of the policies that need to be put in place along those lines are kind of prescriptive in nature, meaning that if you're going to do business in certain ISO markets like the CRR or congestion revenue right market, you're going to have to go ahead and submit a risk management policy in order to do business in that particular space. And there are a lot of good templates out there for that. But I think at the end of the day, like when I think about risks and I think about risk management in the context of CCAs, I think about how much basically market risk do you want to take on, meaning what portion of your supply portfolio do you want to have kind of codified, if you will, in fixed prices, and then what portion do you want to leave kind of hanging out there in the marketplace. Okay. And I think that's a pretty important discussion for an executive leader to have with their board and to figure out what that relationship looks like to the extent you decide to move the needle along.
Great.
Yeah.
I hate to do that.
Yeah.
Clearly, we could have a whole session, and probably should in the future, on risk management strategies. Jan, which one did you pick? Maybe 1 minute, because we're about to adjourn here.
Okay. I'll talk about risk as well. Certainly all of the things that Kirby said, which really focus on the procurement side. Other risks are on the regulatory side. What's going to happen? What kind of regulations or legislation might be coming down? And I think what we've been doing there is hiring someone who's really great to represent PCE, but also, again, getting our board members actively involved. They're elected officials, and they know how to talk the talk with the legislators and making sure that they're involved, staying in close touch with our local legislators and letting them know that we're a resource. If there's an energy bill that's going to be introduced in the legislature, to please come talk to us and let us help make sure that it's at least going to be not detrimental to CCAs, but possibly favorable to us.
Thank you. Geof?
I'll talk about a mistake we made. When we launched, we set up signing authorities for contracts for myself as the CEO that were based on the dollar value of the contract. And in the context of a normal public agency, that makes perfect sense. In the context of a CCA, that makes 0 sense. We do $100 million contracts all the time that have very low risk. We do $50,000 contracts that are extremely risky. So it turns out we had to totally revise our contracting process to re-up it so that it recognized the value at risk. How much risk were we taking with a contract? And the signing authority is now tied to the risk, not to the dollar value. So there is a chain of people who have to sign off on large dollar value contracts, but we can now do essentially an unlimited dollar value without having board approval of that specific contract if it's subject to all the limits of the policies the board has set, all the signing of all the different attorneys who need to review it, and it was seen by the board chair before it actually gets executed. So that turns out to be a really, really important feature because we contract before the price is public. And that's a very important thing to maintain if you want to have anybody bidding on your supply. So that was a mistake we made, and I'd encourage you to look at that closely.
All right. Thanks, everybody. If we give our speakers a round of applause. Thank you all for coming today, and we'll see you in the next session. Thank you.